in conversation. I'm Kay Heflin, here with my co-host, Jim Kalacki, and our special guest today, Gaye Brown. I have, during the 2 years I've lived here, seen Gaye teach classes on bridge, classes on the Bible. I know she's a musician, and who knows what else she does. So I thought it would be wonderful to get to know her and how all these things came together in her life. So Gaye, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here and surprised. I see so many other people and I think, oh, don't we have some talented people? But I didn't think it would be me.
Well, why don't we start off at the beginning, like where you were born, grew up, what you did as a child?
Yeah, I was born in Bridgeton, New Jersey, which is below the Mason-Dixon line, for those of you who keep count. Not by much. I grew up mainly in southern New Jersey. Okay. I was the third of 4 children, so I had learned how to take your turn and wait and help others along. That was just part of the family deal as we were going. When I was 3 years old, I got my nickname, which hasn't stuck here very well. It's Lumpjaw. Oh. And it wasn't my older brother that gave me the name. Dad had been on a business trip and brought us all a little present, and mine was a book of Bongo the Bear. And I guess Bongo hasn't stuck. It's a Disney book, but I haven't heard of it recently. And Bongo was a circus bear who decided he'd leave the circus, and he got out of his train car and he went off into the forest. And the first person he met was this huge bear named Lumpjaw. Oh. And he came up and he says, "Hello there, I'm Lumpjaw." And he slugged the little Bongo and sent him spinning, and they said, "That's the way we say I like you." And so it was, apparently a child's book to teach you that you need to get to know the people you're afraid of. But I went up to my dad while he was sitting after dinner and without any warning said, I slugged him one and said, "I'm Lumpjaw." So he and I forever have been bears together.
Okay.
We migrated to polar bears, and he's been calling me Lumpjaw ever since.
All right.
And the bear is my totem. If you come by my house, I have quite a collection of bears of different types.
Wow. What a hoot. From the age of 3.
Yes, from the age of 3, I've started collecting bears. Yeah. My school it's hard to believe what happened with school. I was in the first grade, I had sort of a normal, what you think of as self-contained classroom. And then for Dad's job, we started to move. And I ended up being in a different school district, sometimes in a different state, every year. And sometimes I was in 2 different states and school districts in the same year. So that by the time I got to 4th grade, I'd been in 7 schools and knew nothing. I'd never had another reading group or another think and do group or another. And I got there just in time for them to do aptitude tests in the 4th grade. And they told Mother I was reading on a 2nd grade level. Small wonder. Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of real catch up to do at the end of the elementary stages. And then living where we did, we had to take the bus to the next county when we went to high school. And that was a pretty rude awakening because in your little kindergarten through 8th grade school, we were still having Valentine's Day's party and we were still doing all the things that 3rd and 4th graders would normally do. And when we got to the next county, they were studying. Oh, they had homework. People wanted them to write papers. And I'm sure I had the shock that all the others that had followed or gone before me had. So that was another big adjustment. But
was that still in New Jersey?
All of it was not in it was New Jersey when I went to high school. We sort of made a circle to Erie, Pennsylvania, and out to Long Island, and had a couple different, a rented house in Long Island, and then the purchased house in the next school district, and that sort of thing. And then coming back, we were in Pennsauken, New Jersey for a little time, and then we finally moved to the home that we were going to stay in, which surprised me no end. I went off to fourth grade and got to know a couple kids, and it was almost time for sixth grade to start. And I said, when are we going to move? Because you never got to know a kid more than one full year at school.
How do you think all these moves shaped you in those early years? Because they talk about moves and changes are a little hard on children. And
Yeah, I had always, even as a young adult, I thought, oh, well, that's wonderful. I got used to these different cultures and different people and certainly different ways of living. But in some ways, it does subtract. I had never learned to have a friend and what friends do for each other. I was always the new kid, and everybody wanted me to do, they do for me. And I didn't understand the other side of friendship if you stay a long while. I definitely lost a lot academically. That was just down the tubes. I was fortunate that I had an older brother and an older sister who would put in the time to help me catch up. That would have been a real challenge had I had to do it on my own.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
So,
where did you go to college after that?
I started at Montclair State, which is a New Jersey state college. I was a music major, majoring on the string bass, and I was perking along there, having a good time, had a great roommate. And my third year, I did my first student teaching, and I was gobsmacked. I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I thought music was all this learning new things and expressions and doing sort of the things I wanted to do with children. I found out you don't get to do with children. They have a curriculum, and you're going to teach them this on this date and something else on the next date. And there was no place for me to have some freedom of movement and freedom of choice and that sort of thing. And I just thought, I got to get out. So I dropped out of college at the end of my junior year. They were desperate for teachers at that time. So I taught a fifth grade class for 2 years, and I really enjoyed that. That was a fun time. So I went back to school at Southern Illinois University, which seems like an odd place off the beaten track. My sister was there at the time. They had an exceptionally good PE classes for her. And so she had gone there, and I thought, why not? I've never been to Illinois in my whole life. So I went there to finish an elementary education. Soon after that, I had married. George was in the Air Force, and they offered him a master's degree at Texas A&M. And so I was trotting along behind him and found out that a master's degree for the spouse of the military was $50 a semester.
Wow.
Not a semester hour, a semester. Wow. For $150, I can have a master's degree. So I said, I don't know what they're giving. I'll take one. And got my master's degree in educational psychology, which has been very, very helpful in all the other things I've done.
Yeah. Can we back up just a step? You said your instrument in music was string bass. Unusual for a woman. How did you fall into that?
That has to do with being bused to the next county. When we were bused to the next county, it was for 9th grade, but the school was 7th, 8th, and 9th. So all of the band and the orchestras were set, and the students had their instruments, and there wasn't much left in the closet. And so when I showed up and said, I'd like to play an instrument, I play the piano, do you have an instrument? Which was what the others had done as well. They said, well, what would you like? And I thought for a minute, I said, I'd like to try the bassoon. Well, we only have one, and that's taken. I would like to try the trombone. Oh, we got 8 of those. So I didn't say anything, and the teacher looked at me and said, well, we do have a string bass, and no one has played that for many years. We think that you're a nice tall girl, and you should play the string bass. So that's how I became a string bass person.
All right.
Did you have fun with it?
I did, particularly in college.
Yeah.
It was really great because our school was very close to New York City. And there was always somebody who was willing to pay me the unbelievable sum of $25 a night to play at their restaurant. And that was, I mean, I'd seen 50 cents for babysitting before I had ever seen money like that. It was incredible. So string bass on the bus to New York is always interesting, but it got more interesting when you had to get the cabs. A cab would not pick up anybody with a string bass. So I would have to get some total stranger to please go out and hail a cab while I stood back in the shadows until they got the cab stopped, and then I'd come out and hop in with my string bass.
Oh, what a hoot.
That was fun.
Wow. So after college, what did you?
I taught third grade for 53 students, 50 desks, 26 of each book. It was a year. And it was a year when they told me they were going to pay me what was then a reasonable sum, $5,000, to teach for the year of these unending children in my classroom. And when my first paycheck came out, I looked at it and I went to my principal and I said, I think there's something wrong here. And he said, no, you didn't sign a contract. That was a contract of intention. The school board intends to pay you that much money if they have it. But if they don't have it, they just pay you what they have.
Oh, no.
So I taught for about $2,600 for the year. And I had to bring in all my supplies. They didn't have money for supplies.
Where was this?
This was Florida.
Okay.
And I don't think they've changed a whole lot. And nobody wants to put money into a school in Florida, particularly money into an Air Force Base school.
Okay.
Because you know, they're not even voting in your state. So why should you educate those people?
Yeah.
So then we went on to A&M. And from there, let's see, trying to remember all the stops along the way. But I taught school for a total of 10 years. Usually, my longest stint was in a second grade. I did have to move because we moved, and whatever was open was the one I took. For a while, I was a homebound teacher, which was a whole new world to me. I was teaching kindergarten through 12th grade of anyone who couldn't come to school because of illness or some kind of disability. And that was an interesting kind of work.
Yeah.
And did that mean going into their homes?
Yes, I would go into the home and teach the child, and sometimes I went into the hospital and I taught them in the hospital bed. At that time, we were still in Vietnam. America was still in Vietnam. And I was going to Fort Sam Houston, which is a huge place in San Antonio. And they had wards that were bigger than this room. And I started to teach a child who I think he was in the 7th grade. And I looked, and here are all these men perched in chairs all around the bed, just sitting there. And I said, can I help you? And they were just bored. They'd been in the hospital. They'd been brought back from Vietnam. They were in the hospital day in, day out for months. And they were just interested in anything that was going on. So I started incorporating them into the classes, and I got a couple more textbooks, and some of them knew it cold. Others of them, this was learning for them. They had not learned some of the math and some of the science that I was teaching. So that made for a fun class. I really look forward to that twice a week.
I should just interject here that if you haven't had a class with Gaye, either through Furl or anything else, and a little heads up, I noticed that we were talking before we started that you brought a bag, and hopefully we'll get to see some of the goodies in the bag pretty soon. But if you haven't had a class with this super teacher, let me put a plug in for looking out for one wherever it is or whatever it is. And you have a good time. And I could just imagine those guys at the hospital sitting around. It must have been such a gift.
Well, I guess I didn't see it. I thought it was a great gift for me because to keep an individual who's in pain or on pain medication with you
Yeah.
for very long can be difficult. But when it became a lively class, everybody was involved, and it really gave it a nice edge.
Yeah.
Nice way to teach.
So did you and George move around much in Texas?
We did. We were in Texas at A&M, and then they gave us a Texas assignment down in San Antonio, which was a wonderful place to be stationed. They had just built the new Riverwalk. There was not even one restaurant on it yet. So we watched it come to life over our 10 years. And that part of Texas is so pretty. You're almost in the hill country. And
You can go watch the bluebonnets bloom and, yes, cover the
every
hills.
year, one of the first things we did was get a TR6, which is a little British convertible. And we did a lot of road, what do we call that? I can't even remember. It was where we and 50 other people all had directions, and you try to complete a course, road rallying. And we were just everywhere with the top down and out to see what there was to see in Texas. Those were good years. It was before the children and all that sort of thing. From there, he was sent to the Pentagon, and we stayed there for the next 10 years. And that was another great assignment because everything in DC is free. The Smithsonian, and there are so many Smithsonians, and the zoo. So we were never at a lack for things to do or for friends, because people in the military all know you're just going to come and you're going to leave, and so you've got to be friends from day one. We don't wait to get to know you. And so we had some really good friends and enjoyable times. And somewhere in there, I said, you know what? I think I have to go to seminary and become a minister. That was while we were still in Texas. I started seminary in Texas. Moved to San Antonio, moved to the Pentagon, and there was no Presbyterian seminary anywhere close. So I had the kids and went over and talked to the Methodists, who have a similar kind of study and guided program, and found out that I could work through their curriculum, and with taking just a couple extra tests in Presbyterian polity, I'd be all set and I could finish my theological education.
Okay.
So my children were there when I graduated from my next school with my divinity degree, and they became the perennial preacher's kids.
What year was that?
I graduated in, I believe it would be 92.
Okay.
92 by then. So I was well into my 40s. I had, been teaching, and then I'd been home. I stayed home with the kids until the last one was in school. So I'd had my time as being a housewife, which I'm not cut out to be. I was great with the kids, but the housewife part was, this room looks clean to me. I don't know why anybody wants me to fix it. Wasn't my thing.
Well, this is I love this story. It gives new meaning to ecumenical between
It was.
Methodists and the Presbyterians.
Yes, I also studied with Catholic monks.
Wow.
There was a Catholic seminary in town, and we were permitted, there were several seminaries around DC, and we had the reciprocal with all the other seminaries. So I was allowed to take some of my classes other places.
Oh, cool.
And I found this one monk who I particularly enjoyed studying sacraments with him. And he always had his little group of monks that were there to study, and me.
And you?
Would you mind sharing with us what led you to this decision?
I wish I could. It wasn't a vision.
Okay.
It was just a case of I loved teaching school. I really did. And then I wanted to become a counselor so that I could work more with the children who were having difficulty, not necessarily academically, but being in school was such a strain. And I started working with them and found, gee, I really need to get into the family system more than I need just the individual, that kind of thing. And at the same time, from the time George and I were first married, we found ourselves looking for churches every time we moved. And we would say, we're going to visit all the churches, and then we'll decide. And we would go to Presbyterian, whenever we got to the Presbyterian church, we would keep going back and say, well, we'll do that one next week. And then we'd join a Presbyterian church. So that got to be then, with some of our moves, let's just go to the 2 Presbyterian churches and pick one, you know. And it was about that time that I suddenly realized that a background with music and with education really was a fantastic background for studies at the seminary. So that's what took me there. And there was a true feeling that God was leading me there, but there wasn't the road to Damascus experience of, oh, that's what I have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. How were you received as a female pastor once you got out of seminary?
It was mixed. I remember the very, very first interview I did. I came into, there was a room with a group of people who were looking for pastors, and I was just getting myself to my chair when somebody said, "Little girlie, I have a question for you." And I just went, "What is it, my little boy?" "Sonny, speak up.
Yes.
I'm hard of hearing." So there were many places where it wasn't accepted at all, and there were places where people were, "Oh, that's neat, yeah.
Okay.
We would entertain that." And so it was a mixed bag. And even when my first church that I was a solo pastor was in Concord, North Carolina. And one of the things I found was that if I went to the hospital and I wanted to visit with someone, that it wasn't visiting hours, or it was in the special care units of any kind, they would say, "No, sorry, you have to come back this," or "We don't let anybody family in." And a man in a suit could walk in and say, "Pastor," and they just walk on through.
Yep.
So I got myself some clerical collars.
There you go.
And I started wearing clerical collars whenever I went to visit in the hospital, and nobody challenged me. And in fact, when I'd just be walking down the hall, somebody in a room would say, "Excuse me, are you a minister? Would you have a prayer for me?" You know, so it really opened doors. But when I'd wear that collar, I can remember stopping one time to buy some strawberries from a little stand at the road. And the man who was running it, I said, "Let me see what you got and how many I want." And he said, "That's some special collar you've got there." And I said, "Oh, I'm quite proud of this. This is my clergy collar. I don't think the Bible likes that very much." So, you have to kind of be a person that can go with that sort of thing. There are folks who can just hear it and it rolls off, and there are folks who that really, really hurt them.
Sure.
So
Begs the question, how are the strawberries?
yes, actually, they were delicious. It took me a while to get him to give me the amount I wanted, but it was good. Yeah.
Well, what a range of working experiences.
I have.
Do you
Yeah.
do you have a favorite amongst them, or?
Favorite. I was going to tell you about my very first ever job.
Oh.
Was sorting maraschino cherries. On a line. The cherries go by, and they were usually halved, and we had to look for pits as they went by. And when they had the little ones that they're going to put in chocolate cordials, that kind of thing, you had to rub every little cherry on the head to see if it had a pit still inside of it. Fascinating job. But that was, end of senior year, time to go to college job. So, did I have a favorite job? Gosh, every time I look back on it, there are ones that were outstanding. One church that I truly enjoyed was down in Charlotte, And it is a huge church that had formed before the time of the Revolutionary War. So this is an old church. They had 5 graveyards. We had thousands of people that came, or not thousands that came to church, but a huge chancel area. It was filled with people on Sunday. And up in front, there's the chancel area, the ceiling was, way, way up there. These little tiny lights, and the area was so big, there were 2 pulpits, that we had a little telephone so we could talk, the pastor and I could talk to each other. I was his associate at the time. And the very first Sunday that I came, the prior Sunday, they had a church meeting of some sort, and someone had slipped a note under the pastor's door that said, "I'm bringing a gun." So they had to call the police, and the men had to be frisked, and the women had to lock their purses in the car, and they had their meeting, and everybody went home. So this next week, I'm brand new there, so I get up and I start to read scripture. And as I'm reading the scripture, there is the loudest pop that sounded just like a gunshot. And people were down under the pews. I mean, they really reacted. A tiny little bulb up there, LED, had popped, and they'd go with smoke and with a loud sound. And so I just looked up from my reading and I said, "You missed." And I went on reading. But the church, I came there because they were having a lot of problems. I didn't have a problem after that. I was just sort of one of them when I said, "You missed." And I just moved on, and off we went. So that was a fun, that church was sort of different in a lot of ways.
Let's talk a little bit about River Landing. How long have you all been here? And
10, going on 11 years in March.
wow.
Yeah, we had decided early, George and I in our marriage had decided, well, what do we want to do looking towards retirement so we can start saving now? And both of us said, well, we were happiest when we were in college. Everybody was your age. We all liked the same music. We all liked, you had friends everywhere. You didn't have to cook. You didn't have to clean. You didn't have to do chores. The yard work was done. And so where else except a senior living community? So we knew that's what we were headed for. And then when we started shopping, we thought we were shopping for 5 years down the road. We came here to visit River Landing and said, George was working from home at that time. It didn't matter where his home was. So we could just move right in. And I was just then between jobs. I became, after I'd done 10 years as a solo pastor, I became what's called a deliberate interim. And I had training to work particularly in churches that were conflicted. And so I thought, well, I can wait till I get settled there and you can find a church that's conflicted anywhere you look. I mean, they grow up around beltways and so on. So we just moved here when we were 66. So we were the babies and have loved it. I always say, of all the things that we didn't have to do it twice to get it right, this was the one we got right on the first try. Because of things like you and because of things like this, it's just such a fantastic place to live. We kept thinking, we can't afford it. There's no way. And it just was, it was the right fit too. So that was wonderful for us.
Do you have any special memories that have happened here at River
Since
Landing?
we've been here at River Landing, what's my best memory? I've had so many because all of our grandchildren were born during this time, and they'd come to visit us, and we used to have Christmas in our place. So those were fantastic memories. Every day you wake up and you have another one of those wonderful memories, or somebody says something or does something that's just great. I was flabbergasted when I got thinking about, why don't we have bell chimes? And I went to Tom and I said, they cost a lot of money, but, if we have chimes, people with arthritis can pick them up and they're less expensive, and brass and all that. And he says, well, you talk to the council. And council said, we don't know. Can you borrow some from this for the summer from a local church? And I said, yeah, that's probably a possibility. Well, I didn't even have to do that. Somebody else went out and borrowed a set of chimes for us. And that summer we had all these new people that were working hard. And when autumn came, they said, think you better buy yourself a set. And, you know, they cost X number of dollars, but we want to give you this because you're going to need music. You're going to need music stands. You're going to need a whole lot of things to go with it. So go for it. And that, it just amazes me. You know, and my husband did the same thing with teaching pool. Can I start a pool class? Sure, go for it. Everything here, my favorite thing, I'm sure, is that it isn't that the staff get together and say, well, everybody will do this on Monday and we'll have this on Tuesday. It just comes from the residents and it's resident run, so that it really makes it a lot more fun, I think.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to shift things a little because I know our time is unfortunately moving on.
I'm sure.
And I know that in your bag there are some very special treats.
Oh, well.
Tell us some of what's in
what I got here. Okay, I'll show you. These are cute little hats, I think. Let's see if this one will fit me. This is for a child, really. My little giraffe up here.
Right.
I have my little giraffe, and I have a ladybug. And I brought my frog.
Have you created these?
I have created them from a kit.
Okay.
Not that, I'm not really a creative artsy person, but I love to do things. The neat thing of this, the hat, of course, is washable. And without any trouble, you can take off the little topper. I've made about 50 of these. George is a barbershop singer, and he belongs to a wider national association where they encourage quartets to become what they call medic quartets. And medic quartets go to the hospital and have a certain number of hours of training besides singing, and they go to the children's ward. And they sing, you know, with the kids, Puff the Magic Dragon and all that sort of thing. So with the nurse's permission, he can take in some of these and the children can pick out which hat they would like to have for their very own. So I just love to sit and knit those. And anybody who's been here as long as I have, or a little less, knows that I love to dye silk scarves. And I started it. My daughter has a cabin in Vermont, which has loads of snow. And I sat there on a snowy day thinking about what would it be to do something while it snows. So I found out how to snow dye. And I think that they take such vivid colors. I was really amazed at the kind of coloring I could get out of these as I did my experimenting. Here, that one's got a little dolphin on it. And then I found that the long ones actually were selling better, this sort. This is 100% silk, Habodi silk. And this was the color when I brought them just to one of the Christmas bazaars. And in the first half hour, I was out of all the blue of this shade. Some of the others stayed behind, but everybody wanted blue, and the second choice was the blue and the purple. So to have, and this one, of course, has that blue in it, but I also put the green in it. But these are kind of fun to do. It takes you a total of about 48 hours, but most of that is having the dyes soak in. When I first came here, I was able to set up my garage and do the dyeing there. I miss my garage a lot. If anybody has an empty garage out there, I would love to rent it. It was just perfect for setting up my dyes in a corner away from the cars, and they could sit there for 20. You treat the silk first so that it will take the dye permanently and it won't be running every time you wash it. And then after they're treated, you put them on like a cookie rack and throw snow on top and then throw dye on top of the snow and leave it for 48 hours. And the snow melts at different rates so that it
You
gives
get
it
different
this kind of
patterns.
mottled look of, you can see where the
Yes.
snow melted first and where it melted next. So you just leave it there for 48 hours and then rinse them out and see what nature did. And I found that different snows make different shades of the same color. You can use the same dye, but because of whatever they're picking up from the atmosphere or any dust that gets in with it or whatever. So I'm hoping if I have myself a little snow machine, and I'm thinking to get that kind of I don't want to use the ice completely from my freezer because it won't have all that nice stuff. But I thought maybe if I froze a few ice cubes from one of our ponds around here, that would add that kind of a interesting thing.
So you don't have to wait for the snow to actually fall. You
Yeah, I
make
can
your
make
own.
my own, and I want to make it, though, as close to nature as I can,
Yeah.
so I get this nice look.
Nice.
So those are what I do when I'm not teaching.
And who says we're not in the presence of genius?
No, that isn't genius. That's just fun, just plain fun.
Right.
Well, Gaye, one of the questions that we like to ask people is if all the arrangements could be made and you could have time to spend with anyone from any point in history, doesn't make any difference if they come back from the dead or if they're living, but if you could pick out 2 or 3 people, who would you like to be with?
Well, I lost a very dear older sister, and she was absolutely the closest friend I've ever had. And as it turned out, I bonded to her as my mother. We were in a very busy, with 4 kids and moving and all this stuff. Mom was really busy when I was born, but she was the one that took over for me, and I would give anything to spend hours with her again. Who would I like to meet in history? That would be fabulous. I can think of so many. I would like my family there when I go to meet Nelson Mandela. There are some authors that I would love to know how they come with the ideas that they present in their books. I'm right now reading this book, Gilead, and it's written from the perspective of a very old pastor who's about to die, and he's writing a letter to his son. And the things that he is able to do with theology that I have not heard before, just amaze. I would love to meet someone who was from an Asian culture. I know nothing about it. I don't know their history. I don't know. I know that the thought process is different because you have a different language. Every language brings its own ability to think. I learned that when I first took Hebrew. An example, Hebrew has 7 tenses of a verb. One is sort of a future present tense, and everything else is a past tense. It's 5 tenses, but everything is a different past tense because in the old Hebrew thought, you were always looking backward to what was great. So David and Jerusalem were the time of greatness. So everything is past tense.
Yes.
And to think that way is totally foreign to me. And I would love to meet people who could help me to think in other terms. I met a woman who was African, and she kept saying to me, why do you say we'll save time if we do it this way? She said, time is for spending. Time is God's gift to you. You don't save it, you spend spend it.
Interesting.
What an interesting way to look at the world. So those are the type of people I would like to
to go back
continue
and spend
meeting. People that have another idea.
Yeah.
As you thought about this conversation in the run-up to it, is there anything that we haven't covered that you thought you'd like to, or anything that you thought you'd be asked that you haven't been asked?
Well, I was all ready to tell you what marvelous children and grandchildren and son-in-laws I have. I'm the luckiest lady in the world when it comes to son-in-laws. They are fantastic. And of course, George and I had an excellent way to meet. I had gone to a wedding for a dear friend of mine who was getting married in Florida at the time. She was in the Air Force and having an Air Force wedding. So I was down there, and George was one of the sword bearers that when they came out of the chapel. And I said to my friend, well, who's that? I was always looking for tall. Who's the tall one? And she said, oh, I'll introduce you. Well, we went on, and I caught the bouquet. That was a nice step. And after the reception was over, everyone involved in the wedding, except the bride and groom, were single. So they decided we'd go to the Officers Beach Club for dinner that evening. And he was there. We sat across the table from each other. And I should go one step back. When the reception was over, we needed a ride. My girlfriend and I needed a ride back to the BOQ, the Bachelor Officers Quarters. And so I saw George, and I said, are you going there? Could we have a ride? And my girlfriend and I start walking to the car, and she's a little bit ahead of me. And I pulled her by the back of her dress. I said, I get the front seat. She said, sure. And the rest is history.
Oh, okay.
So it was kind of an interesting way to meet somebody that when I first saw him, I thought, I got to get to know that guy. So we were married within only a few months, 8 months.
Wow.
Mother was not pleased. But we made it work. So it worked out well. And the big church that I was talking about where the gunshot went off, of course, I hadn't told my family that they had somebody saying they'd bring a gun. I didn't want them to know what kind of church I was in. And of course, after it was all over, all folks flocked to my family to tell them, you know why we were so upset when that. So in the middle, I had to meet them later at a restaurant. So in Applebee's, I heard these little voices chiming, Mom, you didn't tell us they had a gun in the church. And that was the same church that had not had pastoral care for quite some time. So as soon as I hit the ground, I was out and meeting with people who were who were very, very terminally ill, sick. And I would give them communion and have a prayer, and the next day they died. And I'd give somebody else communion and a prayer, and the next day they died. I had that happen 8 times. So my wise guy kids, who'd you kill today, Mom? Every time I came home. So they keep me grounded and humble. I'm still just Mom. So that was a good one.
Well, unfortunately, I think it's probably time to conclude our visit today, and we thank you so much for joining us.
I have truly enjoyed it.
Good, good. We hope you do, and we hope all of you watching this afternoon have enjoyed it also. Stay tuned, and next Friday we will have another guest for you. Thanks.